You can keep buying the newest lures, experimenting with different colors, scents, and presentations, and still spend an entire day without a bite. Yet there's an old-school fishing method involving nothing more than a plastic bottle that can attract fish more effectively than many products sold in tackle shops today. The surprising part is that very few anglers still talk about it, and even fewer explain how to use it correctly. I know this because I went through the same thing. I spent years chasing the next great lure, organizing tackle boxes full of gear, and convincing myself that the answer was always one more purchase away. Then I started wondering why there were days when everything looked perfect: good weather, good location, good gear, yet the fish simply refused to cooperate. That question led me to a technique so simple that it almost sounds ridiculous at first. All you need is something most people throw in the trash every day: an ordinary plastic bottle. There's nothing magical about it. In fact, the reason it works is surprisingly logical. Once set up, it can draw fish into an area from a considerable distance. It keeps working when the water turns muddy, when conditions become difficult, and when other anglers have already decided to call it a day. Better yet, after you build it, there's virtually no ongoing cost. You make it once and use it over and over again. At first, I thought it sounded like another fishing myth. But imagine a river after a heavy storm when the water is murky and everyone is convinced the bite is over. Most anglers pack up and leave. You stay, and you catch fish. Or picture the middle of summer, with blazing heat and bright sun overhead. Everyone says the fish have stopped feeding, yet you're still getting steady action. Not necessarily non-stop, but enough to keep things interesting. And that brings up the real question: why does it work? The answer has nothing to do with secret lures or fishing magic. It comes down to understanding how fish naturally behave, and using that knowledge to your advantage. The reason this approach works is actually pretty straightforward. It takes advantage of how fish naturally move and feed instead of trying to force a reaction. Rather than searching endlessly for active fish, the idea is to create conditions that encourage them to come to you. Years ago, methods like this were common knowledge among anglers. You could find discussions about them in fishing magazines, and experienced fishermen often shared similar tricks at boat ramps, bait shops, and local tournaments. The names varied from place to place, but the concept stayed the same: attract fish into your area instead of spending the entire day chasing them around the water. What's interesting is that these simple systems often held their own against expensive gear. In some situations, they even produced better results than the latest lures and gadgets. Yet as time passed, the technique gradually faded into the background. New products took center stage, old methods were forgotten, and fewer people talked about the basics. But here's the surprising part: the method never actually stopped working. It simply fell out of the spotlight. While anglers became focused on newer and more complicated solutions, this old-school approach quietly continued doing exactly what it had always done. Think about it for a moment. If you build something once and it keeps helping you catch fish season after season, who really benefits from that? Probably not the companies launching new lures every year. Maybe that's one reason why methods like this slowly faded from the conversation. And honestly, that's unfortunate. Because this isn't just another fishing trick, it's a different mindset altogether. Instead of constantly hunting for fish, you create conditions that encourage fish to move toward you. What's surprising is that even anglers who know about this method often make the same mistake. There's one small detail, so easy to overlook that most people never pay attention to it. Yet that tiny adjustment can be the difference between a setup that barely works and one that consistently produces results. The funny thing is that very few people ever explain that part properly. Which raises an interesting question: why do practical techniques like this disappear in the first place? Not because they stopped working. The real reason is usually something else. Before we go any further, if you enjoy fishing content that focuses on results rather than spending money, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. And let me know in the comments where you fish most often. I always enjoy hearing from anglers in different regions and learning about the waters they fish. Now let's be honest about modern fishing for a second. Have you noticed how it often feels like there's always something else you're supposed to buy? Soft plastics that lose their scent after a handful of casts. Expensive hard baits that vanish into a snag on the very first trip. Electronics that seem to get updated every year like smartphones. A lot of this equipment is impressive, no doubt about it. But there's always a new color, a new shape, a new scent, or another upgrade waiting for you. If the fish aren't biting, the answer is always presented as buying something different. And that's exactly what makes simple, proven methods so refreshing. Before long, you realize you're spending more time evaluating gear than actually fishing. Every trip becomes an experiment with new products. And what happens when conditions get tough? A strong wind rolls in, the water turns muddy, and suddenly those must-have lures stop producing. The first thought for many anglers is that they need to buy something else. Sound familiar? If you break down the costs, the pattern becomes pretty obvious. A soft plastic lure might not seem expensive, but it only takes a few fish or one bad snag before it's ruined or gone. Then there are weights, leaders, hooks, lost crankbaits, and attractants that disappear from your bait in a matter of minutes. Little by little, every fishing trip turns into another round of spending money for the possibility of getting a bite. Now compare that to a simple bottle setup. Once it's built, there's very little to replace. It can be used again and again, season after season. Which naturally leads to another question. If something this simple can be effective for so long, why did it fall out of favor? The answer has less to do with fishing and more to do with how the industry evolved. As tournaments grew, advertising expanded, and new products flooded the market, attention shifted toward whatever was newest rather than whatever was proven. Over time, old methods were pushed aside. Fishing magazines became filled with gear reviews, stores focused on the latest trends, and practical techniques started sounding like stories from another era. Yet the method itself never vanished. People simply stopped talking about it. And that brings us to one of the biggest mistakes anglers make today. Many assume that if their bait smells strong, fish will automatically find it. But in reality, scent often never reaches the fish in a meaningful way, which changes everything once you understand it. Most anglers never think about what's actually happening beneath the surface. They tie on a scented lure, make a cast, and assume the smell is spreading everywhere. But that's not really how it works. In reality, the lure leaves behind a very narrow scent trail, and that trail can disappear surprisingly fast. A little current, an aggressive retrieve, or changing water conditions can break it apart almost immediately. For a fish to detect that scent, it often has to cross that exact path at exactly the right moment. If it misses it, the fish may never know the lure was there. There's another problem most people overlook. Scent doesn't always stay where you want it. Some particles rise higher in the water column, while others sink. Meanwhile, the fish may be holding at an entirely different depth. So even though your bait is producing scent, it might be doing so in the wrong place. The frustrating part is that you can't see any of this happening. From your perspective, everything seems normal, so you keep casting and waiting, unaware that the scent trail may have become ineffective long ago. That's where the bottle system changes the game. Instead of relying on a moving lure to spread scent for a few seconds, it creates a continuous source of attraction. Think of it less like a lure and more like a signal station underwater. Inside the bottle is a mixture of natural ingredients, fish pieces, oils, bait, or other attractants. As water moves through the bottle, those scents are released gradually rather than all at once. The result is a much larger and more stable scent corridor moving with the current. Instead of a thin trail that quickly disappears, fish encounter a steady stream of food signals over a much wider area. And when fish repeatedly detect a consistent food source, they often begin tracking it back to where it originates. That simple difference is what makes the entire system so effective. This is where the whole approach starts to make sense. Instead of waiting and hoping that a fish randomly crosses paths with your lure, you're actively drawing fish into the area where you're fishing. The difference can be dramatic under tough conditions. Picture a river after a storm. The water is stained, visibility is poor, and most anglers have already decided it's not worth staying. Meanwhile, you're fishing a simple jig, nothing fancy at all, yet the bites keep coming. Not because your lure is special, but because the fish are already in the zone. There's another advantage that rarely gets discussed. On heavily fished waters, fish see the same artificial presentations day after day. Crankbaits, swim baits, soft plastics, they've seen it all. A natural scent source, however, is something different. Instead of trying to trick fish into striking an artificial bait, you're presenting a signal that feels much closer to something they would naturally encounter in the water. Of course, none of this works if the setup is poorly built. Small mistakes can ruin the entire system. If the openings are too large, the scent disperses too quickly and the attraction fades within a short period. If they're too small, the scent release becomes weak and ineffective. The same goes for the ingredients. Choose the wrong mixture, and you might attract small nuisance fish instead of the species you're targeting. Success depends on getting the details right. That's why the setup itself matters so much. And surprisingly, it all begins with something incredibly simple: choosing the right bottle. Most anglers don't give this part much thought, but it makes a difference. A clear 1-liter plastic bottle is usually the best option. Before doing anything else, make sure it's thoroughly cleaned. Any leftover residue can affect how the system works and create problems before you even make your first cast. Why is cleaning the bottle so important? Because even small amounts of leftover residue can change what happens inside. Sugary drinks, juices, or other remnants may start breaking down in the water, creating scents you never intended to release. Instead of attracting your target species, you could end up drawing in completely different fish. Then people try the method once, get disappointing results, and assume the entire idea is flawed. The next step is where many anglers unknowingly go wrong. It's not enough to simply drill a few holes and call it done. The placement and number of openings determine how the scent spreads through the water. Think of them as a way to control the release rate. Too many openings and everything washes out quickly. Too few and the scent remains trapped inside. The goal is to create a slow, steady flow that continues working for hours rather than releasing everything at once. Once the bottle is prepared, attention turns to what goes inside. In most cases, the best ingredients are natural food sources that fish already recognize in that particular body of water. Matching the local food chain usually produces the most consistent results. Softer ingredients can be placed inside a small mesh pouch to keep them from breaking apart too quickly while still allowing scent to escape gradually. It's a simple adjustment, but one that can noticeably improve how long the setup remains effective. The final step is balancing the bottle properly. Add enough weight to keep it in position on the bottom, then pour in some water while leaving a small pocket of air at the top. Many anglers overlook that detail, but it has a surprisingly important job. That trapped air affects how the bottle settles underwater and helps maintain a more consistent scent release over time, making the entire system work much more efficiently. So why leave air inside the bottle instead of filling it completely? It's a small detail, but it makes a bigger difference than most anglers realize. The trapped air helps the bottle settle at an angle rather than lying flat. That position allows water to move through the setup more naturally, carrying scent with it. Without that slight tilt, water circulation becomes less efficient and the scent trail can weaken considerably. Now we come to the part that probably matters more than anything else, where you place the bottle. This is also where many anglers get it wrong. After attaching a sturdy cord, don't position the bottle right beside your fishing spot. Instead, place it farther upstream from the area you plan to fish. At first, that seems backwards. Wouldn't it make more sense to keep it close? Not really. The goal isn't to fish directly over the bottle. The goal is to fish where the scent trail travels. The best locations are usually places where fish naturally gather: drop-offs, submerged timber, weed lines, channel edges, rocky transitions, or similar structures. Once the bottle is positioned correctly, it begins creating a scent corridor that moves with the current. Rather than casting randomly around the water, you can focus your efforts on the areas where fish are most likely to intercept that trail. This is often when anglers start noticing a real difference. Sometimes it feels like the entire area suddenly comes alive. Smaller fish often show up first, followed by larger predators moving in behind them. Even without electronics, there are signs to watch for: surface disturbances, baitfish activity, birds working the area, and eventually the thing everyone is waiting for: bites. One thing to remember, though, is that it rarely happens instantly. In many cases, the first signs of activity don't appear until 20 or 30 minutes later, after the scent has had enough time to spread through the water and attract fish from the surrounding area. At some point, you notice a major change in the way you fish. You're no longer throwing your lure into random water and hoping for the best. Instead, you're casting into an area where fish are already gathering. That's the key difference many anglers miss at first. Rather than spending the day trying to locate fish, you're fishing where fish are naturally moving in search of food. Of course, attracting fish is only part of the equation. What happens after the bite can be just as important. A common mistake is reacting too quickly. The instant anglers feel a tap, they often swing hard and try to set the hook immediately. But fish don't always take the bait in one motion. Many species grab it first, adjust it in their mouth, and only then commit. If you rush the hook set, you can pull the bait away before the fish has fully taken it. It took me a while to recognize that pattern. After enough missed fish, I started paying closer attention. Often, after the initial strike, there's a brief pause or a slight change in line tension. That moment can tell you a lot. In many cases, it means the fish has turned and is moving off with the bait. Waiting an extra second or two can make a surprising difference. Then, when you finally set the hook, everything comes together. That's when fishing gets exciting. The rod bends, the drag starts peeling line, and you know this wasn't just a lucky encounter. The fish didn't appear by accident. You created the conditions that brought it there. And where does this approach shine the most? Anywhere moving water can carry scent naturally. Rivers, streams, canals, current seams, and even wind-driven lakes can all be excellent places to use it. Wherever water movement helps spread attraction through the environment, this system tends to perform at its best. This approach tends to shine during spring and fall, when fish are naturally feeding more aggressively. But here's a misconception you hear all the time: people assume it only works in moving water. The truth is, it can be effective in lakes and ponds too. You just have to adjust the setup. Instead of using a larger number of openings, reduce them slightly and make them smaller. That slows the release rate and helps the attractant last much longer in calm conditions. Another adjustment is to suspend the bottle beneath a float and position it a short distance away from where you're actively fishing. Even on days when the water looks completely still, there's usually more movement below the surface than most people realize. Temperature differences, subtle currents, and shifting water layers continue to move scent throughout the area. The process may be slower than in a river, but the principle remains the same. There's also a little-known trick that can be surprisingly effective during the hottest part of summer. We've all experienced those days when the sun is blazing, the water is flat calm, and the fish seem completely inactive. In those conditions, some anglers add a small amount of ice to the bottle before placing it in the water. It sounds unusual, but there's a practical reason behind it. As the ice melts, the cooler water naturally sinks, helping carry scent deeper into the water column. During hot weather, many fish spend much of their time in deeper, cooler zones rather than near the surface. By encouraging the scent trail to move downward, you increase the chances of reaching fish where they're actually holding. On rivers, the current usually takes care of scent distribution on its own. But on ponds, reservoirs, and similar stillwater environments, this simple adjustment can sometimes produce noticeably better results. One of the most amusing things about this method is how people react after it works for them the first time. The response is usually something like, "There's no way it should be this effective." I remember feeling exactly the same. But every now and then, the simplest ideas turn out to be the most practical. I know an experienced tournament angler who tested the setup near an old river channel bend. It didn't look like a particularly special spot, yet over the next few hours he caught several quality fish while anglers around him kept changing lures and wondering why nothing was happening. Before discovering this approach, he often spent long days on the water with very little to show for it, while constantly buying new gear in search of better results. Later, he added up his yearly tackle expenses and was shocked by the total. The savings weren't coming from some miracle lure. They came from no longer feeling the need to chase every new trend. Another story involves a retired fishing guide who stumbled across a discussion of a similar technique in an old article. He decided to experiment with it simply out of curiosity. The first successful trip didn't convince him. He assumed he had just gotten lucky. But when the same thing happened again on the next outing, and then again after that, he started paying much closer attention. Eventually, he realized something that many anglers overlook: most people aren't searching for luck. They're searching for repeatable results. Since then, he has introduced the idea to many of the people he takes fishing. Once they understand how to position the setup and work with the current, they often notice fish becoming active in the area more consistently. Of course, no fishing method works perfectly every single time. There are always variables beyond your control. And that's important to remember, because the next example shows exactly how small mistakes can sometimes make a big difference. One angler decided to test this method on a river and, at first glance, everything looked perfect. The setup was in place, the location seemed promising, and the conditions were decent. Yet hours passed without the result he expected. So what went wrong? Surprisingly, the issue had nothing to do with the bottle itself. It was what he put inside. He used chicken meat, which attracted plenty of fish, but not the species he was hoping to catch. Smaller fish and non-target species showed up, while the catfish completely ignored it. The interesting part is what happened next. Instead of giving up and declaring the method useless, he made a couple of simple adjustments. He switched to chopped baitfish and repositioned the setup near a different piece of structure. Less than 2 hours later, he started landing quality catfish. That's often how progress happens in fishing. You try something, learn from the outcome, make a small adjustment, and suddenly everything starts making sense. The good news is that most anglers pick up these lessons fairly quickly. For many people, the first signs of improvement show up during the very first trip. After a few outings, patterns start to emerge. You learn which locations perform best, which ingredients attract the right fish, and how different conditions affect the setup. Before long, you stop relying on guesswork and start making decisions based on experience. Some anglers even end up building multiple versions of the system for different waters and different species. And maybe that's the biggest advantage of all. Instead of relying entirely on luck, you begin influencing the situation yourself. You're no longer hoping fish happen to pass by. You're creating conditions that make fish more likely to move into your area. Of course, one thing should always come first: knowing and following local regulations. Fishing rules vary widely depending on the state, region, or body of water, so it's always worth checking the regulations before using any type of attractor system. Before trying any system like this, it's always worth taking a quick look at your local fishing regulations. Some waters have specific rules regarding attractors and baiting methods, and a few minutes of research can save you a lot of trouble later. It's a simple step that many anglers overlook until it's too late. When you really break it down, the setup couldn't be much simpler. You need a plastic bottle, some bait, and a length of cord. That's it. Most anglers already have everything they need sitting in a garage, tackle room, or boat compartment. The entire setup often costs less than a single premium lure, yet it can be reused trip after trip without constantly spending money on replacements. What many people appreciate most, however, isn't the cost. It's the mindset shift. You stop worrying about every new lure release, every advertising campaign, and every piece of gear that promises miracle results. Instead, your focus moves toward understanding fish behavior, current flow, and how scent moves through the water. The more time you spend with the system, the more you start noticing details that other anglers miss. You begin recognizing where a scent trail holds together, where it breaks apart, and which types of structure naturally funnel fish into an area. After a while, you may find yourself adapting the setup for different situations. One version for catfish, another for predator species, and another for areas holding panfish or other forage species. That's usually when the biggest realization happens. Success was never really about finding the next miracle bait. It was about understanding a repeatable process and applying it consistently. Picture yourself a few seasons from now. The weather is unstable, the pressure is changing, and everyone around you is convinced the fish have stopped biting. Boats start leaving the launch ramp. Anglers pack up and head home. But you stay. You position your setup, make a few accurate casts, and continue catching fish. Not because you discovered some secret lure, but because you understand something many people forget: the fish are still there. Sometimes all they need is the right reason to start feeding. And before we wrap up, I have one small favor to ask. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more practical fishing strategies that focus on results instead of spending money, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps support the content and lets me know you'd like to see more old-school fishing techniques that still produce results today. Before we finish, I'd like to ask one small favor. If you found this idea useful and you're tired of spending money on gear that promises incredible results, but rarely delivers, take a second to hit the like button. It helps this video reach other anglers who are looking for practical solutions rather than another excuse to buy more tackle. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. My goal here isn't to chase every new trend or review every product that hits the market. I'd rather focus on fishing methods that have proven themselves over time and continue to work regardless of what's currently being advertised. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me what type of water you fish most often. Is it a river, lake, reservoir, pond, canal, or maybe even saltwater? Every fishery is different, and I read the comments regularly. If enough people are interested, I'll make more videos explaining how to adapt this system to different conditions, species, and types of water. Because the real key isn't the bottle itself. It's understanding how to adjust the system to match the situation in front of you. Once you learn that, everything starts making more sense. Techniques like these shouldn't disappear or remain buried in old fishing magazines. Useful knowledge deserves to stay alive, especially when it helps anglers spend less time guessing and more time catching fish out on the water.